Hey everyone, real quick before we jump into today's episode, former guest of the show, Noam Levenberg, has recently started a plugin company called Safari Pedals. And let me tell you, the plugins sound amazing. You have to check out the Gorilla Drive on your kick drums. Seriously, it adds so much life and excitement. He's offering listeners of the show 20% off with the coupon code SecretSonics20. And of course, there's a 14-day trial if you want to check it out. So go have a look. There's a link in the show notes below. All right, on to the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 182 with Scott Hull. I had a great chat with Scott, and we talked about so many things, including landing an internship at Masterdisk and working with Bob Ludwig. He talks about leading an interdisciplinary life, striving for excellence, the role of the engineer, his approach to mastering, avoiding overprocessing and doing more with less. We talk about becoming familiar with your monitoring, how human hearing and perception are malleable, how mastering is a perspective more than a process. We talk about analog versus digital mastering and cutting for vinyl. He shares an amazing Steely dance story and an amazing John Mayer story. We talk about rolling with the chaos, decision-making, and having a successful mindset, and everything in between. This was a great chat. I really loved this conversation. I think you will too. So please stay tuned for my conversation with Scott Hull coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone. If you're a music studio professional who wants to build deeper relationships with better clients, former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, has created some free educational resources for you. The link is in the show notes below, so go check it out. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Scott Hull. Scott is a 40-year veteran mastering engineer and the owner of Masterdisk Studios in Peekskill. I hope I pronounced it right. Peekskill, New York.
Yep.
Scott started his career in 1983 and has mastered and cut major hit records in every genre, as well as many Grammy-winning titles. He's widely regarded as an expert in vinyl mastering. Scott and I connected recently online, and he's graciously agreed to join me on the show. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Scott.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So I'm sure you've told your story a million times, but I'd like just a 2-minute TLDR. How did you end up doing what you're doing today? Because you're at Masterdisk, which is like this epic mastering, plant, I guess. What would you call it? Facility. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't actually, grow up wanting to be a mastering engineer, but I did know that I wanted to get involved in making music and electronics and working with other musicians. And so I was a trombone player through school, got accepted into a music school program on trombone, and that also had a recording arts and sciences major. So this was upstate New York, SUNY Fredonia, which still has a really good Tonmeister program. So from there, we learned all about music. I actually doubled on trombone. I've got the piece of paper that says I'm a professional trombone player, but that's not exactly as useful as it might appear. But I always knew I wanted to be on the other side of the glass. I always got more enjoyment recording and creating. I mean, heck, I used cassette decks to record our band or the jazz ensemble, whatever. So short story is there was an AES chapter, Audio Engineering Society chapter in upstate New York associated with the school, and they invited Bob Ludwig to come up to the program and give a talk. And so that was when I first saw Bob, and just a chance opportunity, and I got an internship with them at Masterdisk. Literally, wasn't planning. It sort of chose me. The career path and all the opportunities kind of just conspired to push me towards this. Even though at the time I really thought I wanted to be a record producer, be a recording mix engineer and producer. But the opportunity to be in the room with the superstars at Masterdisk was just undeniably cool, and it just kept getting better and better and better. Just to give you a sense, I mean, on any given day during my internship, it was either a Dylan or Springsteen or Sting or Mick Jagger or Bryan Adams and Diana Ross. It's just really, it could go on and on. I could go on and on and on and on. It was a cavalcade of hit records in all sorts of genres. I didn't even, that was also Herbie Hancock and Chuck Mangione, and it just sort of never ended. Anyway. So that internship, I did really well there. They gave me an opportunity to work for them in a role that had never been tested, an assistant mastering engineer. Nobody even really knew what that was. It was literally left to me to figure out. We'll give you 3 months if you can figure out how to be productive. Well, then we'll see. And I did. And then opportunities came along very quickly to learn and become the in-house digital expert, because digital audio, digital recording, and some other things related were just around the corner at that point in the mid 80s. Yeah. And so while the guys, the other engineers were busy cutting records every day, I was pouring through manuals and going to conferences and just filling my head full of everything that I needed to know.
That's so
and
cool.
Helped explain that all to them. So and then I did some database programming and ended up kind of helping them update their productivity, as they were growing through this whole, understand this was before remastering. So remastering was just we didn't even understand what that really meant other than reissuing an old record. This was now repurposing things that were for vinyl now on digital. So there was a bunch of opportunities to grow with the business. And honestly, I just didn't spend much time looking back. I just kept looking forward to where things were going. But I did notice that I grew I missed recording. I missed being in the studio with songwriters and artists. So I began to use the wherewithal I had from my gainful employment to build a private studio. And it started as an 8-track and then went to a 16-track. And by the time I was sort of done with it, I had a Harrison 32 input console, wedged into the basement of my homestead in upstate New York, with a 2-inch 24-track machine and we recorded bands in a 2-car garage, while I was in the basement with the mixer. So I've always sort of had that outlet, had that need to be creative on that kind of level. I'm not entirely unique that way, but it's not ever really been just solely focused on mastering. It's always been, how does mastering fit into the production flow of a professional record?
Yeah. I mean, I resonate with wanting to do more than one thing. People talk about you have to niche down, only be a mixer, only be a mastering engineer, only be a producer. And it's there's so many things that are interesting, it's for me, as a bass player, it's hard for me to put down my bass altogether. You know what I mean? I still get joy standing on stage and playing bass. So it's hard to kind of divorce all the things,
I know the people that I look up to have been through the years have all been multidisciplinary people. They've been, both equipment designers and developers and technicians and testers, but also acousticians, and they all play an instrument. They're not just they're not just technical or computer geeks. They all play. They all have a band on the side, and so you could always kind of relate it to that multi-hat thing. Ludwig, for all those years that I assisted, was really no different. He co-owned a studio out on Long Island for a while, and would do recording and production projects out there when he had time. He probably would have done more, but he was just literally so bloody busy mastering every day.
He's done so many records also. Wow. Yeah, just I know he was a mentor to you. Maybe there was one lesson you could distill to my audience of something that you've taken with you as you've carried on in your career.
I wonder if I should do. Well, there's one I repeat often, and then the other I don't repeat quite as often. But let's see. The one I repeat often is, "The perfect is close enough." This was whenever I, as an assistant, I was posed with a question, and I would show a tape that had been filled out or a timesheet that for the CD that had a little correction and a cross out or something that had been corrected. And I felt like I needed to ask his approval. Was this okay? His answer, he'd never say yes or no. It was always, well, perfect is close enough. And it would always meant going back and doing it again. And that was, it was pervasive throughout the whole facility. And quite frankly, is one of the things I wanted to bring back to Masterdisk when I took over in 2008, or when I purchased it was then a 4-room mastering studio and lathe and cutting room and, a whole host of engineers. I wanted to bring that concept of excellence back to it. Not that they weren't, but collectively they weren't. They didn't have what Bob had created at that time. The chief engineer that was almost it was almost impossible to be satisfied with the results. If it could look at it and go like, that's absolutely perfect. Well, that was satisfactory.
Man, wild. I guess that's how you build a reputation, right?
Well, yeah. And it's also kind of easy. It's odd. It's sort of easy to build a business model around that. If it can be better, we do it. If it can sound better, we do it. It's not like, well, he's a really good doctor for, someone that charges half of what everyone else does. He's a really good lawyer considering what he charges. It's either you're really good at what you do or you're inexpensive. You're less expensive. And so it's actually kind of easy in a way to build a business model around that when, well, of course, I'm also going to admit that practicality does have to enter into the equation. We can't spend millions of dollars on esoteric gear unless people are willing to pay me for it and to use it. But it governs our sort of a decision about whether or not we've tried as hard as we really could. Well, anyway, I think people probably understand what I mean by that. The other interesting thing
dedication to that 100%.
Yeah. We're certainly always reaching for it. Honestly, admitting that there's times when you're not there, but always reaching for it. And my clients do really appreciate that I'm there, swinging for the fences with them on every record. And even though I'm not financially involved with them or, going to benefit from their, commercial success in a big way, I act like I am. And I, because that makes me feel good. I've always feel like it's my job to be just as much an associate, with my clients as the producer would be.
No, I love that. I really resonate with that. I feel like it's like there's like that team player aspect, and then when an artist feels like you're on their team and you're on their side and you have their back, that just builds that trust that they're just going to keep coming back and working with you over and over again because they know that you have them.
Yeah, it's. You really don't want to. The other side is not a fun place to be in. Trying to intimidate people into taking your opinions and to trying to. One of the things I hate the most when I see what I'll call amateur engineers and producers working in a space when someone makes a comment that they want to try something like, nah, it's not. We're going to waste all the time. It's never going to work. It's so much easier and so much more fun, honestly, to give that idea a try. It's like, and I've literally seen people spend an hour trying to convince somebody to not change something. Then it would just, put up the other mic and let's listen to it. If it doesn't suck, let's do it. Because that person then feels more like they're part of the conversation. I've always felt like that's my role as a, enabler, advocate. When I do record, get behind the console and do a recording session. One comes to mind in the other room where we had a string quartet, and they were very used to having engineers put up the microphones and hit record. And then when they got done, they, came over and listened to it. And I've got the score and I'm following along and I'm marking up the score. And they get to the end and like, oh, well, what do you think? It's like, well, somebody came in a little early on bar 15. And I think you probably should take that last 24 bars again. And they look at me like, "Oh, that's so cool! You were listening." And so they did those two. They did those two fixes, and then I said, "If you want to listen to it," and I said, "You sure it's good?" And I said, "I'm positive it's good. I was following along on every note." So that kind of level. We got twice as much done, and it was a kind of ensemble that wanted more of a free spirit. They actually were using period instruments, so they really didn't want it to feel over rehearsed or micromanaged. They just wanted it to be good, and I was able to help them do that.
That's really cool. Yeah, I feel like maybe in this day and age, also with like cell phones and distractions, people are not necessarily fully there, and you kind of to give that 100% service, you really need to be fully in the session focused.
It's really, really hard to be a player and be producing your own music. You did I play that chord in time and tune? All your focus, your energy is in doing that. You can't really tell if somebody else, you get to the end and like, oh, did you notice the drum fill? It's like, no, I had no idea there was even a drum fill missing or there or not, because you're busy doing something else. So that's, for me, that's the role. That's what I call the engineer. I think the industry, refers to that more as like the recording record producer. But I've always seen that the role of the engineer, as long as everybody's comfortable with your contributing, why would you why would you disengage? And it goes right to trust, in my opinion.
Yeah. I love it. Well, clearly, even though you're also interested in recording and stuff, mastering has been the main thing that you've done. What was the thing that made you fall in love with mastering?
It was the people. It was because of being in that studio at that particular time when artists were coming in. I mean, I'll just pull two crazy. Well, geez, I sit here and think it's like 3 or 4 or 5 crazy experiences. But I was literally sitting at a desk like this with an editing workstation, and Eric Clapton was sitting next to me, and his producer was sitting on the other side, and we're assembling 24 nights, right? Which is a live performance, live concerts from 24 different cities around the world. And it was my job to try to make it sound cohesive. And interesting enough, they came to me and they weren't even mastering it at Masterdisk. I had gotten a reputation as a really hot something engineer editing engineer at the time. So we were fully engaged in it, but we also kind of a quirky way. We had a habit of leaving the doors open at Masterdisk. None of our studio doors faced each other. So it was pretty common for us to, for our artists and producers to see each other and bump into each other during the session. So sitting in the session there with Robbie, with Eric, and Robbie Robertson walks by on the outside going past the door, and he looks in and goes, "Eric, Robbie, oh my God," big hugs. And this whole session just kind of completely comes to a stop. And I sit there as still as I could. When I wasn't a kid at the time, but you're still young. And I really remember thinking to myself, if I stand completely still, they won't notice that I'm here. And so it was, being very respectful, but it's those sort of experiences that made that environment of mastering interesting, and kept my involvement over the years. The engineering part of it plays into the technical and both technical and creative sides of my brain, where I really kind of always brought all of those things together. I was the kid that would take apart TVs because I wanted to see how they worked, and mess around with early synthesis, and Craig Anderton's DIY audio electronics for guitarists book was something that I read cover to cover several times. And if I didn't have that experience, I don't think I would have at Masterdisk in those years. I probably wouldn't have. It wouldn't have made quite that much sense, but. That certainly had a lot to do with it. The people that were there, the producers and artists that were special.
Yeah, I think from a lot of the mastering engineers I've met, they didn't necessarily think they would be a mastering engineer. They just loved music, they loved engineering, and then all of a sudden, just like for some reason, it fit their personality, and they're like, "Oh, this actually is really cool and very creative and has its own thing."
Yeah, we had one engineer at Masterdisk who had been in school as for fashion. Hadn't had any audio training or any specific music training, but turns out he was a good DJ. And that putting shows and putting collections of musics together was like the foundation that he needed to be able to make decisions in mastering. And then at the arm of somebody really good, you're able to learn the technical part of the craft and stuff. Myself went into an audio program to get in there, but that wasn't. It was certainly not the norm. It was more of an unusual path in. Usually, you learned it at the elbow of a master, and when the master got either too tired or too old, or was needing to slow down his schedule, then you got some opportunities to prove to the world that you could do that too.
Yeah, totally. Wait, so run us through a typical mastering job. Like, what's the first thing you do when you get a song?
Well, I have a thing about when clients send me a whole bunch of words about their music. I usually wait until after I've listened to it before I delve into their dialogue. I have a thing that I like to say that I think everyone kind of wears their most recent past experiences on their sleeve. So if they had just done a record that got messed up in mastering, or they thought was too bright or was too bass heavy, they'll preload the conversation with all of that, previous baggage. And so I want to listen to it. I want to see if the music is consistent with the message that I'm getting. when I'm listening to it. Because if that's the case, then I don't really have to work. I just have to let the music do its thing on me, and then I can just be a fan of the music for the day, and that makes the decision making so much easier. It's not always the case, but when a record that was meant to be a really hard edge driving record is mixed a little bit placid, a little bit soft, it might lead me to wonder, was this supposed to be a hard record that didn't quite make it in the mix? Or is this actually a overly played record that was actually supposed to be kind of gentle and and easy on the ears? So then I'll ask questions or I'll review the notes. But I really like to get my first instinct, my first reaction. I want to get that noted either in my mind or on a piece of paper or even sometimes recorded initially one or two songs where like, this is what my instinct told me to do. Because through the years, I found that if I get lost in all the documentary about, the conversations with the label, conversations with the producer, conversations with myself, I find myself coming back to what did I want to do from the very beginning? And it's almost always, it's close. That's closer. It's really close to what's needed. It's not an egotistical statement. It's just it's not that I'm some mass arbiter. It's literally the more you think about it, the more confused you get.
Yes. Yeah, there's that famous story about the Thriller record, or is it Billie Jean specifically, and they did 100 mixes or something, and then Quincy Jones has said it was mixed too, go way back, or so. I might be getting it wrong.
Somebody told me a story about a room full of a mixer and a producer and a band in the studio, and he was an analog console, and he had all the mix worked up and blah blah blah, and everything was kind of going, and he kept working on it. And at one point, the mixer kind of turned around and secretly kind of looked over his shoulder, and he came up and pulled all the faders down, and everybody in the room was like, "What happened?" He's like, "We lost it. We lost the mix. It went too far." He said, in this particular case, the lead singer had been tapping his foot a while back and now was disengaged in the process. And that just meant to him that what he was hearing was also the case. It's like it was no longer, somehow it got unexciting, and he was willing to tear it all down to put it back together again. It's an interesting story.
There's that thing of overprocessing, right? You have to I do find that that's something that you're wary of in the mastering seat of not overdoing it.
The very hardest thing for the younger engineers to get a grasp on is when to stop. Because mastering is this little extra enhancement, brightness, loudness thing, and almost every time a new person touches it, they can make it seem a little bit more intense, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit brighter, and your brain immediately tells you, "Oh, that's better." But when have you gone too far? Is a much more senior, I don't mean aged person, but it's a senior skill in that you have to have been there a whole bunch of times prior to recognize that you're not serving the song anymore, that you've got your tools out and you're solving problems, but you're not serving the song. And that's hard to recognize. But when pointed out, when I do point that out with a younger engineer, they go and I take out, 2 or 3 bands of the EQ that they're doing. They'll tell me why they're doing this and why they're doing that. Because the vocal is not quite bright enough, but the guitars are a little bit harsh, and I'm doing this and that and the other thing and it's take this thing out. And then, is that really better with that in, or is it almost better with it out? And sometimes less really is more, but you got to make yourself listen to it
objectively.
I guess, you really have to check your work and make sure that you're really not just believing, you're drinking your own Kool-Aid at times.
Yeah. I think that's that's sometimes it's just about bypassing, it's just oh, did this really do what I was hoping for it to do? And because you go, sometimes you bypass 2 of the plugins that you put in, for me, because I'm in the box, but I don't even master, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And then it's okay, all right, there it is.
Well, you
went too far.
You mentally invest quite a lot to to do something. It's like, oh, this song needs to be brighter. For me, more technically, like I can hear this kind of cloudy hump around 150, 200 hertz. So I want to deal with that. So you deal with that, and you go like, well, now the bass isn't quite so. And so I deal with that. And now the vocal's kind of thin, so I do something else, and they're not mutually exclusive things, even though the controls on the box, make you think that they're mutually exclusive. There's additive effects of all of those things in. And one of the other things that takes a little while for mixers to get used to when they move over to mastering is how little EQ and little compression you need to make a dramatic difference. They're kind of so used to throw it on 3, 4, 6, 8, 10 dB of EQ. Their like mastering version is like +3 and plus, -2 and +3 and +4. I mean, that range of the controls on my EQs, they don't even get exercised, out past +1. I can't tell you the last time I've been above +2 really on anything on my console. So that's amazing. And that's not because the mixes come in so amazing sounding. It's because the character of that EQ starts to get outside of its window of brilliance for me, of where it starts. And so I'm going to look for another solution if I'm really having to do that. Turns out a couple, the Weiss digital EQ is really good at doing more larger scale things. It just holds the music together better for me for some reason. I'll use that, or maybe a very, very select in the box EQ to do the heavy lifting of a pre EQ. But I'll try wherever possible to keep those as broad strokes, just influencing the mix in a general sense, and then using the analog tools to kind of refine that. But it doesn't take a lot of numbers of EQ. And again, you have to listen before and afters really carefully. Your ear kind of gets used to the EQ. So, +2, +1.5 sounds good. Well, let's try +2. Well, that sounds pretty good. +3. Oh, that sounds pretty good. So then you stay at +3. But in fact, really, you kind of were where you needed to be at in the lower numbers. I would just challenge people to try less and see how it tastes. It's kind of like spices in cooking. You probably can use less. You don't have to taste the oregano. You really don't. It's in there. It's influencing the soup. You don't have to taste it.
Yeah. Totally. That's a great analogy. That's super, super interesting. Yeah. I know like mastering engineers sometimes have like some voodoo tricks of like, lowering, 80 hertz and that brings out 40 hertz somehow. And you have like these like little miniature maneuvers that just help. You could bring different things forward by dipping things out. Is that something that you find?
An artist does the same thing with light and with color and tone, in a painting, or if you're illuminating a sculpture or something, just the tiniest little, or lighting for cinema. Just a tiny little change will move your perspective over to something else in the frame. Just by really subtle transition of light, as the car goes by and this reflection, flashes onto something on the side of the screen. Suddenly you're looking there. You don't, the first time you watch something, you don't even realize your attention is being drawn over there. But then later you go like, wow, there's this other stuff going on that subconsciously I saw, but I didn't really pay attention to. And that's why you can listen to a great mix a whole bunch of times and find new things in it, because your mind's wandering around through the mix, trying to absorb what was placed there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everyone, if you've made it this far into the episode, then you're probably a fan of podcasts that help your personal development in the music industry. Former guest of the show and fellow podcaster Travis Ferentz hosts Progressions, a show about finding success in the music business. If you dig Secret Sonics, I have a feeling that you might enjoy his angle too. You can go check it out via the link in the show notes below, so go check it out. All right, back to the episode. I feel like also getting those nuances, it must be like, with with the monitoring setup that you have, and for mastering, you just need that extra monitoring. Do you think that helps people do less as opposed to more? Maybe like people in like home studios, or not even home studios, but could be a well-treated room, but doesn't necessarily have the same kind of speaker setup that you have. So you need to really push it to really hear what they're doing more.
Yeah, that gives me two thoughts that are worth mentioning. One is getting really, really used to what those speakers sound like in your room. And that you don't get to that by listening to a couple songs and thinking, okay, so these are bright and the bass is a little weird. I mean, really get down to the point where you understand what plus one at 60 hertz sounds like in this room, and what plus, what plus a quarter at 2K sounds like in this room. And so getting to know the speakers in a really refined and intimate way is essential. But one thing that does happen is if you spend enough money on, the amplifiers and on speakers to get transparency, then you're not hearing the speakers and amps nearly as much as you're hearing your processing. So for me, the big one there is compression. If the amplifiers or speakers are slowing down the signal at all, that's going to really mask my compression that I put on. And it's going to cause me to want to overcompress when it's really, that's right, because that's what I'm hearing. Well, one way of putting it, when you're learning a new set of speakers or deciding whether a set of speakers is adequate, can you hear really fine changes all the way across the audio spectrum? Can you put a good EQ on and AB in and out at a half dB from, say, 80 hertz, up to about 12K? Can you blind, turn the thing on and off a whole bunch of times? You don't know whether it's in or out, and listen to it in and then listen to it out. And if you are always clear that you can hear that change, then your room isn't masking that change. And when people have trouble in a mix environment, it's almost always the case that the room or the speakers or the amps or something there is creating a buildup of a particular frequency, or a blurring of the phase and frequency responses around that frequency, that you have to turn the control all the way up to +2 or +3 before you start hearing it, really reliably hearing it. And that's a problem, that you're going to have trouble mixing on those speakers. The transparency, for me, it's not an absolute. For me, there's not like any rule or flat anything. We don't hear flat. I don't hear the same way now after having an earbud in for 20 minutes than I did before we started. So everything is constantly changing.
Of course.
I had a little more coffee today, so I'm going to be here listening differently than I was yesterday. But I give up on the absolute. I don't RTA room. I don't shoot my rooms. I'm not looking for flat. I don't care about flat. I want to be able to hear the change that I make. And so then I can make a decision based on that change. And with that, I was able to move from room to room, with about a week to 10 days of acclimation each time, and without really kind of missing a beat. I mean, I can go back to stuff that I did 30, 40 years ago, and it still sounds pretty good to me in a room completely different from where I was in when I did it before. At least the decisions made, I still believe in most of the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, learning your speakers is so important. What are your thoughts on headphones? Like, are you pro or against people, trying to master on headphones? Do you think it's possible?
It's possible. It's mixing on headphones, mastering on headphones is possible, but it takes that same kind of work. Recently had a client that brought me some mixes for mastering, and that really weren't quite what we needed, and I was going to try to coach them through the process of making it better. And we soon discovered that he was in a room that really couldn't be solved without a wrecking ball. I mean, he was in a space where he had windows and doors and walls and a bed and closets and cabinets, built-in cabinets. It just was unable to make any sort of changes to make it meaningful better. And he didn't like listening on headphones. It made him feel uncomfortable. So I gave him an exercise to try to get him comfortable listening on a set of headphones. He had a pair of AT M50s, which are okay, but they've got their issues. But if you got used to them, you can make some pretty good judgments on them. Certainly better than he was with this set of JBLs sitting cockeyed on these Tupperware containers that he had them propped up on. So my point is, with the background, you can't just pick up a set of headphones and have any idea what you're listening to. But if you listen to work that you respect, the records that you know, and you do that repetitively, spaced repetition, every day listening to that same 2 or 3 songs on that set of headphones, in less than a week, you know what that record sounds like in your headphones. Right. And now you can compare that to your mix and go like, oh, well, my mix isn't nearly as bright as this Tom Petty record, or that my drums are way louder than this Nirvana record. It doesn't really matter what your reference is, just get to know it really well,
Yes.
and then use that as the ruler that you can use to measure.
Absolutely.
One of my colleagues I actually was literally talking on my own podcast about mix evaluation, and he was surprised to find out that that even at this point in my career, that I'll pull up records and listen to them briefly in my room just to kind of recenter my perception. If I've been recording or working in the other room, for a whole day or two, or been in headphones for a large portion of the day, I'll put a record on that I know in my room. I mean, these are also records these are records that I've mastered in my room as well. So it's things that like I can play literally like 2.5 beats of Kamakuriat or Steely Dan, Two Against Nature, and that the point on that kick drum and the snap on that snare is that kind of immediately centers me back into my thinking. So it doesn't take long.
That's amazing.
And that brings me to, I'm sorry if I'm going on this too long, but I think it's interesting.
No, I love this. This is what I want to hear about. This is what I'm curious about.
If you listen to anything for too long a period of time, your brain starts to factor in those changes. So one of the things that you'll find in common for most mastering engineers is this rapidly changing from A to B, EQ in, EQ out, compression in, compression out. We listen really quickly because we've learned that if we listen slowly, a half dB is lost. We can't tell whether that half dB at 1.2K on a broad filter, whether it's really better or not. You listen through it all the way through, top to bottom, then you make a change and listen to it all the way through. By the time you get to the end, you've forgotten what the first one sounded like, and you're kind of guessing. But if you go back and forth several times in rapid succession or compare something to something else, we pick up an enormous amount of detail in just a very little snap. Yeah. Of course, I listen all the way through the songs. Of course, I absorb the whole momentum of the song. But when I'm making decisions like that, quick A/B comparisons are vital. It's the only way to really know what you're hearing, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I know myself personally, like I also will do that, like a bunch of like A, B, and because you can kind of hear the gestalt of like the frequency response or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, and our memories are so short with audio. It's like I've heard like 5 seconds or less or something that you could actually remember what you heard.
It's, we use the same brain, same neurology, albeit slightly different sensors, but we use the same thing with our vision and with our sense of smell and touch. And how many times have been completely fooled by a smell that reminds us of something it's a completely different thing, but it brings us back to something else that we've experienced. Our brain is trying to pattern match everything we see and hear all the time. It's trying to, like, oh yeah, I remember that bass that was like on the Hall & Oates record. Your brain is like constantly trying to not even, we're not even asking it to do that. It's always trying to do that. Right. Some of the studies about our vision are pretty astounding because we fill in details. I could go on a whole nother 15 minutes on just this alone, but we fill in details that aren't actually there, but are from our memory. One line from a book that I was reading, coincidentally was being written by the professor of audio at Fredonia when I was there. But long story, David Moulton went on to do a whole bunch of other great things. And he was writing this book about the driving experience. And one of the things that he had talked to researchers about is nearly everyone that gets involved in an accident says, I looked, there was no one there. And and this happened. I'm a motorcycle rider, and so you always have to be aware of whether people can see you or not. And you'll see oftentimes motorcycle riders checking their blind spot 2 and 3 and 4 times. It's not until like the second or third time that your brain says, "Oh yeah, you want to actually look there." Not just refer to the memory of what was back there. So we're constant. Some of our tricks with audio is that we're really having to kind of, and these quick changes, rapid quick changes, kind of tell our brain, okay, stop trying to find the patterns here. I want you to listen to something. I want you to identify something new. And so
Yeah.
getting a little odd with all of this, but understanding, I think it to some extent that, how gooey, how soft really our perception system is, and how we have to fool it into giving us the information we need to work.
Yeah. It's everything is so subjective usually, right? Like, but I guess as a mastering engineer, you're trying to give that objective last opinion, right, of the record.
Yeah, we want to believe that it's all just a dB at 12K and a half dB at 4K, but with all of that said, you do then have to sit back and go like, is the song working? Am I hearing what I'm supposed to be hearing? Is my mind paying attention to the hi-hat and completely losing the cool little noodly riff in the background? So maybe it doesn't need to be brighter. Maybe that needs to come down so that my attention will go to the thing that's probably more important to the success of the song.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I from the very beginning I said I don't often spend too much time thinking about the words. I don't try to absorb the words of what people say about how they want a mastering session to go. Oh my God, like a half an hour ago, you asked me, how does this mastering session go? And I didn't get past the opening stanza.
Yeah.
They'll usually send me some information. I initially try to avoid taking it personally or internalizing it. I want to listen.
Yeah.
I want to develop my own opinion. Then I'll read, and then I'll often get on the phone and ask a couple questions about the subtle differences between what I'm hearing. I think one of the things that gives people an opportunity for them to begin to trust me if they haven't worked with me before is if I offer something that I've heard and a reason why I would like to make that change, maybe something I haven't considered or something that maybe that's been bothering them the whole time that they just didn't have a way of putting it into words. And it's really important. I'm a first time listener. I don't know where the bad notes are buried. I don't know that that's the third or 15th take of the guitarist. I don't know that this is the second drummer because they had to fire the first drummer. None of that matters because I'm just reacting to the music. And I've made mistakes in the past where I get really involved in that dialogue, and then I realize that I'm listening to it with their commentary.
Yeah,
and I'm not actually.
You need to get rid of the
it.
artist's baggage and just kind of be that objective third party that says, "Hey, this record is done. This record is good."
Yeah. Well, that's also a very good point. This is the final reckoning for the project, and quite often people get very consumed with is it perfect? Is it done? Can I walk away from it? Can I make it better? And they get, and some really get stuck here in that process. Yes. And the revising, changing the mix, changing the order, going back, revising the EQ again. It's like, oh, the whole thing sucks. And
and as an artist, I was there once, and I got my record I made 10 years ago mastered, and I was still at the beginning of my audio journey, and I hated the master. And we redid it. I bought Bob Katz's book. I just totally did a deep dive, was overthinking literally every aspect of it. But I had to go through that to kind of learn what mastering was, and that I had to trust my own instincts also, and all these things are important, but it's
mysterious to people, just like glass blowing is mysterious to people. You look at it and go like, how do you know? How do you know that that the thing's not going to break? How do you know it's not hot enough? How do you know, or that it is too hot? Or how do you know it just needs to sit and rest for a second before you continue on? I don't pick that avocation for any particular reason, but it's the same thing that you would a dog handler. How do you know that was. That's this experience, and that's what seems like black magic to people because we make it look easy. On the surface, it is easy. It's an equalizer, it's a compressor, it's an A to D converter. It's that's pretty much all it is. So it's really simple. I should be able to understand that, right? Well, it's that. I usually say something like mastering is not a process; it's a perspective. There isn't a thing that we do, but a history. And a way of and a listening experience that we want to bring to it. Yeah. And we have to be on the same page with we have to be on the same page with the artist and producer, because I can be trying to push this into something that I think makes sense, and we've got to find out if that's really what they want.
Yeah, totally. And there's a mastering engineer I've had on my show who has a podcast also, Sam Moses. I don't know if you know him, but he says like, hey, I listen to thousands of records. Like I've listened to way more records than you have. And this is just like, so I know what records sound like because I just listen to so much more records. Even if you're a music producer and you love music, you're not listening to as many records as a mastering engineer is listening to.
No, you're really not. I usually have this sort of job pyramid that I kind of think to myself about. A typical producer, maybe we'll go back 10 years when the record industry was doing its thing, and, kind of typical record producer might do 4, 5, 6 major albums a year. Maybe some only did 1 or 2, but they're probably not doing more than 8. A mix engineer, might do 3 or 4 or 5, but might do as many as 15. Or if they're in the jazz realm, they might do 20 albums a year. I'm abbreviating it for your benefit, but the mastering engineer, there's oftentimes I'm jumping into and out of 20 projects in any given week. Sometimes 4, 5, 6 projects into and out of revisions and updates and discussions, preliminary mix evaluations and final masterings and final EQs. I might be in and out of 20. On some days, I'm in and out of 10 or 20 projects in a day. Oh
my God.
So it's a little catastrophic, a little
you
chaotic.
must get decision fatigue or something, right?
Well, yeah, but that's why it becomes really important to make quick decisions.
Yes, right.
and be able to trust and be able to believe in your instinct and trust trust that your first reactions. I kind of corollary to what I said earlier. It's often easier to offer a solution and then sit back and listen to it than it is to discuss what that solution's supposed to be. So a client says, I don't know, it seems a little kind of fuzzy. I thought it was going to be less fuzzy. I could try to figure out what they mean by that, or I could send them 2 different versions from my brain thinking, well, maybe they mean this and maybe they mean that. But by giving them 2 really kind of different alternatives, they would go like, they either hate both of them, which tells me something, or they really like one or the other, which tells me something even better.
Right, and you don't have to spend more than 10 minutes on that, right?
Exactly, and then we could spend some time talking about why they liked it and what they heard change. Okay, so it's an interesting observation from mine years ago that for some reason people started to comment on the EQ changes I was making as sounding like compression to them. Now, this was before we started doing a lot of peak limiting. So peak limiting and compression are really kind of a different story. But the idea of running through a compressor where you're kind of balling the frequencies up and kind of, kind of filling up all of the open gaps with sound. Yeah, there's times when an equalization sounds that way, especially if you're trying to move stuff around, like, smooth out the bass or, bring... Anyway, I came to the conclusion that I have to be really careful when someone says they want a certain EQ or they want a certain sense of compression. The words are sometimes completely opposite of what they actually mean and what they want, but it's the only words that we have to use to describe them.
Yeah, I think I recognize that for myself from like the beginning of my process, and even sometimes today probably of like, oh, I think I heard that must have been like, I don't know, I'm not in the mastering seat, I don't know what they're doing. You imagine based on what you hear, but you don't necessarily know what that is, and you kind of, I guess you have to ignore it, right? You kind of have to ignore it and just do what serves the song.
Actually, if all of my equipment had detents but no labels, I could reset it back to setting A and X prime, I would actually be happy. My clients would be happier. We don't need to know the numbers. It's a matter of whether it ultimately, if it feels good and if it sounds good. The manufacturers have quite arbitrarily put numbers on the fronts of their faces of the gear, and plugins even more so. Like technically, yeah, one EQ is bringing up a sine wave at 10K by a dB, and another EQ is also bringing up a sine wave at 10K by 1 dB. But if you look at what it's doing to other frequencies and how it's changing phase and how it's changing the character, one sounds completely different than the other. So the number really doesn't matter. ultimately. Record engineers know this very well. They don't generally set things by number. It's all by feel. They're looking at the speakers and they're turning the mic pre and they reach over and grab the distressor and it's all set by feel. That's really what mastering engineers do more often than not, except we're around this environment. The idea comes to me, that there's something missing. And so that's, that usually comes along with an identifier. Like I'm feeling a hole by around 200 or 300, but sometimes my hands just reach for the controls, especially when I'm really kind of in the moment with the music. And I find myself like, oh yeah, that's what it needs. I'm like, okay, I'll take that. I don't know where that idea came from, but it works.
Right, because you're so intimately familiar with your gear and the tactile experience. It just kind of like becomes second nature, I imagine.
Yeah. But you got to also just always be willing to tell yourself that it's not right. If it's not right. So that's
right. You have to be able to erase all your hard work.
Exactly. A brief experience yesterday was only talking about a little bit of mid-range, but I had two different ways on two different EQs for opening up the mid-range on this particular thing. One was benefiting the in this case, it was a dulcimer, a hammer dulcimer part. It's not Appalachia. This is a progressive fusion rock band, fusion jazz band, House of Waters, that uses a hammer dulcimer like a electronic keyboard / guitar. Amazing. Max is an amazing instrumentalist. But one way of adding the mid-range benefited the dulcimer. The other way of adding mid-range benefited the drums. And I just kept going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it was, it was a little bit of conversation with them about it. And I kind of highlighted the problem for them to listen to. And he had a clear preference over one of the other. And we went with it. But I don't usually rely on other people's preferences in the room because I know they're not familiar with my speakers, they're not familiar with things. But when I could isolate it so easily for them, it's like, this is, we know that the music needs to be lifted a little bit in the upper mid-range, and these are the two different ways I've got to do it. As it turns out, for him, the drums and cymbals were already a little bit on the bright side, so anything that added to that was not cool on this particular song. So, yeah. But you always have to be a little careful when you're attending a mastering session, that because in a global sense, you might really not know what it's supposed to sound like in that room. Yeah. And you really do need to rely on, ultimately they were relying on me to make a decision, but I was I was sort of second guessing myself a little too much because we were talking about a half dB at 2K. So it wasn't, or around 2K. So it wasn't the end of the world one way or the other, but it just helped with a little bit of perspective.
Amazing. So I'd love to ask you a little bit about, the different gear that you're using. It looks like you're mostly going out of the box. What do you ever master strictly in the box, or is it always hybrid? What does it look like for you?
Well, when it's out of the box, there's even at that point, there's some hybrid aspects of it, which I can choose to use or not. But, the sound of the converters, enter into it. So the choice to go out of the box, has to factor in, how much does it change coming back in? When the times that I will use in the box, there's two different times that I'll put serious consideration towards, working in the box. And one is a record that comes in really loud with a really defined sonic character already. It's kind of been mixed to be loud. It's got really pinpointed kick drum. It's got modern rock stuff or metal where it doesn't need a lot, and going through my analog chain actually takes me too far away from where I want to be. So it's right. Like just the chain alone will change the sound too much. That's the first one where I find that a really good digital tool will let me sculpt and make some improvements without detracting, without taking anything away from the mix already. And then the other is where the the transient response of things like the compressors and the A to D kind of blur up the transients. And I guess maybe the third, which is related to that, is when it's so close that it just needs to be breathed on slightly. And it's hard to do that with analog stuff. I mean, as transparent as you want to tell yourself the A to D and D to A is, right, it certainly has an impact on the sound going through your mastering change. So all analog, yeah, when it's needed, it's great. And when you don't need that much, don't need those tools, then I've got, the jewelers, the little screwdrivers for fixing your eyeglasses. And I've got the smaller tools in the box that allow me to do very, very small manipulation work. It's almost never, I would say, honestly, it's really kind of never about whether it being faster or not. Sometimes in the box takes longer because you've got sort of infinite options that you have to kind of wade through. One of the other things is if you have a $10,000 EQ and a $6,000 or $7,000 compressor and another $10,000 EQ, you want to use them. Because
we saw that Soundtech, right?
Yeah, so what they can contribute to the end result. But then you got to pull back from that. Is it really better? I get asked this question quite a lot when people print through tape. Well, not necessarily something that was recorded for tape or to tape initially, but they might go through a tape loop to do a particular pre-processing that they think sounds good. And I almost always, when I'm given the time, I do that two ways. I will master it without the tape, going through my tools, which includes some tubes, includes some transformers and things that will, by nature, kind of slow the signal down a little bit. And then I'll do a completely different mastering, same song, but through the tape, live through the tape, then through the console. And then really listen to the outcome. How far can this song go from just in the box? How far can it go with the tape through the box? And might be a surprise to find out that only about 20% of the time does the tape actually win in that situation, because the tape is taking away too much and adding the layer of hiss and adding some blurring of the stereo image and things like that. So while you're gaining in some areas, you may forget to look closely enough to see the areas where you're losing. That's really the case when the tape machine isn't like a perfectly maintained, hot rodded, professional tape machine. Like if you're going through a Tascam deck, thinking it's helping your production, it may be hurting more than you're willing to admit. It's just because of but you just haven't, you're just not perceiving it. It hasn't been pointed out to you yet.
Yeah. I spoke with Bobby Osinski. I don't know if you know him, but he was bemoaning how hip tape saturation sound is these days, because he's like, we were trying to avoid this back in the day, and now everyone just wants to have that sound. But I will admit that good tape saturation on like drums does add a thing that you can't really do without it. But whatever.
Well, we just did a live in the studio to Analog Tape thing next door just 2 days ago. And the artist's impression was like, wow, I think coming back off tape really is smoother, really is leveled out. It's almost like we put a super subtle compressor on it and kind of like dialed back the upper mids a little bit. And this was a perfectly aligned the Studer tape machine. It wasn't EQ'd to sound smooth or thing, but the engineers back in those days, we were just talking about 80s and 90s, we're used to the sound that could predict what the sound was that was going to come back off of tape, and we worked with that. Yeah. Now, with decades of working with digital, you have to take that into account if you're going to use tape. And then I guess toward the point of what you just said, we find ourselves reaching for saturation because the circuitry in digital plugins is inherently really crystal and clear. Right. And our brains, ears are kind of want to hear a little bit, a little more glue, a little more fuzz, and a little more angst or whatever it is that fills in the glue.
Yeah, there's definitely. I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast of like, it's also like what it's like. Yeah, it's like the history of recorded music and what we've been we grew up listening to. Like it's not necessarily that it's better, or if you know if digital had come first, we might prefer like a cleaner sound or something. But this is like, you know, those Led Zeppelin records, those Beatles records, those records that, you know, informed the way we listen to music. They were grainy and they had that fuzz or whatever, you know.
It's this debate goes on and on, rages daily about the inherent qualities of vinyl and making records and how fraught they are with technical problems, but you know, yet people really like listening on vinyl, and they like the entire experience of vinyl and collecting. And so, the last conversation I had with somebody over an email was also just a couple days ago. It's been a busy week. Not lying. There's been a lot going on this week. My end of that conversation was, what does it matter why they liked it? You know, we don't have to really understand that, you know, why somebody likes something more. You know, let's make it for them. You know, and other people really appreciate the stark cleanliness and lack of distortion in HD audio, you know, streaming from Tidal or from wherever else, or in high resolution playbacks and converters, and they can hear 0.000% distortion and they don't like it. But, you know, so let's make some music for them too. But we don't really have to. It's not a right or wrong. It's you know,
taste.
Like chocolate or vanilla, or do you like them combined? You know,
yeah,
really, that's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely, and I will say that chocolate ice cream is my least favorite ice cream and my least favorite type of chocolate. But that's like that's like the most taste thing I will ever.
I can't recall the last time I've had a vanilla cone. It just doesn't.
Like different things, and that's okay. I do want to get into vinyl a little bit because I know that's one of your specialties. But let's just jump into it now. So
Sure.
So how does it differ for you when you're mastering for vinyl versus not digital master, versus a digital master? And let's say you are mastering for vinyl, is there like one master to rule them all, or do you make separate masters?
Well, I'd like to know in the process if the record that the producer's making is for audiophile consumption or whether it is for consumer, you know, memento, you know, buy at the merch table kind of thing. If there's a way for them to answer that question early on, that helps us decide where to spend the money and how to spend our time. Because if it's a memento, then deciding to take off a song or switching to a double instead of a single album has a lot less meaning, because it's about having the physical product. It's going to sound good. It's just, are we really going for, you know, 45 RPM short sides with all, you know, high fidelity? Is that really what the consumer wants? Are they willing to pay extra for it? You know, and stuff like that. So if I can find that out, that helps.
Yeah.
For many styles of music, I really think there's one ideal mastering that works as a stepping off point for both formats. Usually, I mean, I started this before digital, so my brain still has this sort of model of a good sounding master that's not loud. What do we need to name? Maybe, you know, all of the Steely Dan catalog, or Dire Straits, you know, Money for Nothing, or Brothers in Arms record, or 10 Summoner's Tales. These were records that were made at Masterdisk when I was around.
Yeah.
And had some relevance to my opinion of things. Or Genesis, or Phil Collins solo record, or whatever. I'm getting off track, but the point being that good was completely disconnected from loud in that sense. So it needed to sound good. There was tone, balance, there was dynamics, and you can still master for that target, and then decide, does the digital need to be limited more and compressed more, and if so, does that mean we have to change the EQ a little bit? And then, you know, but we're working from then the vinyl master that could also be your HD master if you wanted to have a open and wide dynamic range HD master. So
yeah,
more often than not, and it's also it's a function of who my clients are, which tend to be a little bit on the alternative and singer-songwriter and the experimental and jazz sides of things, are typically not as concerned about it being screaming loud. That certainly doesn't mean I make screaming loud records, but by and large, most of them that are going to vinyl, that use my services are looking for an audiophile type experience. So we're working from that perspective. But the reason why I asked that question up front is we could spend days talking about whether or not 24 minutes is on a side is adequate, or whether it needs to be 18 or whatever. But if it's a record that may not even be taken out of the shrink wrap, then it's really, I don't want to. Honestly, don't want to waste their time and money on something like that, on decisions like that. If it's going to be reviewed, if it's going to be given to an influencer, to listen to, or to review, or to talk about, then of course we want to dot every I and cross every T. I personally usually work from the vinyl side of things first. It's very hard to, once you've given a client a compressed and loud version of something, for them to accept one that's softer, that has a lower average level, has more transients, actually has more snap and more hi-fi sound, but is soft, doesn't go to 11, like the Spinal Tap. It's softer. It's one of the quickest ways to get fired as a mastering engineer, is to send them back something that's softer than what they thought their original was.
Of course.
It doesn't matter whether it's better or not. If it's softer, it's you're
toast.
For that reason, I'm out. The trick, though, is including the client in the approval process for vinyl from a digital reference. So it's tricky. The people they do have to just sort of trust that I've got the helm. I know where the boat's supposed to go, and I'm going to point it in the right direction. Some people that want to micromanage that part of the process, that aren't vinyl collectors themselves, might not really even know why we're going, through this other channel, or why we're taking the weird route to get to where we need to go. One thing I want to say for public consumption, though, is many master engineers that don't have cutting experience, in my experience, will overprocess for vinyl, because they're like, well, we know vinyl's got this problem with out of phase bass, so we better mono the bass. And we know vinyl's got this problem with high frequency distortion, so we better make sure we hit that de-esser extra hard. And there are times on the record, I want everyone to hear me, there are times when you do not need to mono the bass, and when you do not need to worry about high frequency distortion. And the very simplest case is on a long slide. On a long slide, the level's going to have to be lower, and in which case the groove geometry will be just fine. The lower level means we don't have to worry about high frequency saturation and distortion. And the phase undulations in the bottom end may prove out to be absolutely fine. Or we may only have to do a little bit of processing right where that floor tom roll is, because that's what's causing the groove to go crazy. But when you send off a master to a factory style mastering and cutting operation, they're going to put the filters in just because it's the easy way to do it, the fast way to do it. They're being paid to cut as many sides a day as they can, not cut the most perfect sides that they can.
Right, and there's that's a crazy backlog also, right, on the factory side of things. Right?
There's almost everyone's working beyond their capability. They're just churning out as many things as they can. Not to say that all, and I've actually got called on this on occasion, because some of the guys who cut for factory institutions are actually quite good, but quite often they're not compensated to spend the extra time that needed to really get it right.
Yeah.
Case in point, if I didn't master the record So you send me something that's been mastered by somebody else, even if they're good. I've got to listen all the way through the record to find out what cutting issues I might have, and to determine what the best amplitude, how loud to cut it so that it fits and doesn't distort and doesn't skip. So those are all three characteristics that have to go in together.
Wow.
If I was not paid by the hour, I would pick a lower level, and the thing would be cut, and it would be simple. It wouldn't skip, it wouldn't distort, but it would be kind of boring. And so this last 10% that we add by spending this extra work really has the potential, anyway, of taking a record that's kind of meh on vinyl and having it really jump out of the speakers, like the records that we grew up loving and idolizing. So if you're a consumer of vinyl listening to this and you've kind of noticed that records sometimes sound kind of meh, that's one of the reasons that either they weren't mixed specifically enough for vinyl, and somebody took like the digital master and just manhandled it to make it work. And I could go more into what I mean by that, but if you hyper compress something and really boost the top end a lot, to get that to work on vinyl, you've got to do quite a bit of derogatory, filtering and cutting, sure. And you really have to bring the level down to the point where you've lost all the benefit of that gain.
Right.
And for the technical, for people that can kind of follow along with this, if you've crushed all the dynamics out of the record and pushed it up to the ceiling to make the CD or make the digital file sound great, I'm going to have to lower that whole thing back down so that it fits on a record. And now all of your transients, all your sparkle is gone.
Yes.
And that's really what makes the record kind of sound boring and flat to me.
Right.
Is it's lost that attack, that sparkle.
Right.
Oh, otherwise, how could we go back to a record that's 20 years old and have it sound, have it jump out of the speakers and sound amazing? So I like to tell people that a production style and a mix style and a mastering style that was good in 1975 or 79 or whatever, that works really great on vinyl, and it almost cuts itself.
That makes sense.
They were made together, and if you include analog tape in that as part of your intention, then it's almost even better. Because the analog tape has kind of smoothed off some of the transients and some of the harshness, but also still giving you the drive and the intention. But some of what is written about how to prepare mixes for vinyl is a little misleading and a little too easy, and unfortunately causes people to do damage to their mixes when they really don't need to. By pre-processing in ways. Well, for instance, if we have a DS, if we have an S problem on a side, it's usually not on the first, second, or third song. It's the last song on the side, because that's where distortion problems are magnified. And it doesn't mean we got to roll all the top end off. Certainly don't have to roll the top end off on the other three songs. We just have to hit the S's a little harder on that last song. And so we've got a purpose-built de-esser for that, but we'll also go in and surgically EQ some of those S's. And while that does take a little of the S out of the program, the alternative is I can keep the level hot and I don't have splattery distortion. That's kind of a pain. But even at that, it's a production decision that I have to share with who's making the record.
Yeah.
One client of mine absolutely wants their records as hot as I can possibly make them, and have them not skip and distort. So I know that their criteria, they want their records to. They sell a lot of their 7-inch and their 10-inch to DJs, and they of all it's not exactly pop, but it's. They want it to be dynamic. They want it to jump out of the speakers. And so I know that criteria. Another client in a similar type of format, but really want a hi-fi experience. They want the person that had bought a really good turntable and has spent money on their listening system, they want them to not hear any distortion, would be crystal clear, nice, and be accurate to the original master, like not be changed.
Yeah. Wait, so do you have an in-house cutting engineer at Masterdisk?
Well, I'm the chief engineer doing the cutting, and Garrett is also doing quite a bit of cutting. Has been for the past several years. So prior to him, Alex the Turk was at Masterdisk, and we had trained myself and Andy Vedetta trained him to cut, and prior to him, a couple other engineers. So there's always an evolution of new engineers that have the interest and the desire to go deep into vinyl, and are willing to and able to it's spent several months experiencing vinyl, because there are these, oh my God, I had no idea moments all along the process. It's kind of like what we talked about initially about the perspective in mastering vinyl. It's even that, just even more amplified, because if you haven't seen that problem before, well, you wouldn't even be looking for it. We wouldn't know to look under that thing.
Wow.
Even as it is sometimes now, I can hear through as I pass by the door to the cutting room. It's like, oh yeah, he's dealing with that muted trumpet thing again. If you put a Harmon mute in a trumpet and try to cut it onto vinyl, good luck. It creates this ridiculous sawtooth waveform that vinyl really has trouble with.
Wow.
Miles Davis records with the muted trumpet are almost always quite soft. They have to be. They just, you can't cut that particular waveform without distortion. And it's a buzzy waveform to begin with. You'd think that it would hide the distortion, but it actually makes it even worse.
That's interesting.
And glockenspiel, sometimes vibes, those things with really hard transients sometimes cause problems for cutting. But see, my point is, it's not just high frequency sibilance and phased bass. There's all these other little nuances that you got to see the whole big picture.
Yeah, it's just years or as you said, months at the very least.
Well, it's years with supervision. It's actually could be it's years without supervision. It can be done in months if somebody's cutting every day and observing the fallout of their product, the successes and the failures. We always learn so much more from our failures, but
right.
You're like, well, I'm not going there next time.
Yes. Amen. That is true. Well, that was so informative. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's great.
Welcome.
I'm curious what you guys are thinking about, or if this is even on your radar, like the Atmos surround thing. Are you mastering only stereo? Is that something that you're thinking about, concerned about, happy about? I have no idea.
I'm not against it. I've been through the here comes surround. The surround is coming. I've been through that 3 or 4 times already in my career. In 97, 98, we put a surround sound room in Masterdisk. It was before I left the first time. The studio I went to in 2000, Classic Sound, actually brought me on board to spearhead a surround and DVD authoring operation. That once I got on board, they realized, my God, this is going to be really hard to make money doing this, and they realized that I was bringing in a lot more cash mastering records, and they didn't have to spend $200,000 or $300,000 on machines to make it work. And then again, and so I'm a little jaded with it, but I really don't mean to put the format down. I hope it takes off, and I hope people figure out how to use it. It's not interesting me at the moment, and I find myself in a kind of in a weird way, dying to go back to one microphone and mono and simple studio recordings and analog tape. And I've decided to just go that way. Let that passion take me somewhere, and I'll jump on board if it becomes undeniable. But at the moment, it's not in our plans at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, I feel that. I haven't heard the format, so I've only heard binaurally, so I can't
I've
judge.
Heard it binaurally. I've heard it in presentation format. I know there's great applications for it. The same thing I said about DVD audio, which was surround capable back in the day, is when the artists get involved in creating content specifically for that format, it'll have a chance of taking off. But right now, the labels are just like, make us an Atmos mix because Apple wants an Atmos mix, and I just don't feel like it's a tail wagging the dog, in my opinion.
Right.
The artists need to create content that's compelling in that format, and some do. It's being done in sort of the art music world and in certain stages. I have done several surround. I do work in surround, but Atmos is I haven't taken the leap into Atmos.
Interesting. Yeah, I interviewed a guy from Brooklyn named Willie Green, who I don't know if you know because you're not so far from him, and he was saying the exact same thing. Once artists like do something interesting from the get go in Atmos, that will be interesting, as opposed to like just remixing it or in that form.
Yeah, I find that still, even with live concerts with heavy use of the rears, my attention, I'm not following the, I made this joke just the other day because somebody asked me, it's like, I don't usually go to a rock concert and then like kind of spin around on my chair to experience it in 3D. I'm kind of watching the music in front of me, and but I don't want to, I don't like people putting down formats because they don't understand them and haven't experienced them. So I that's not my point. It's not inspiring me at the moment to get involved.
That's a great point. I love it. Awesome. Okay, so I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up a couple of some of the amazing records that you've worked on. Let's talk about Two Against Nature, because that won the Grammy. Famously, I think it was in 2000.
It won 4. It won 4 that year for best song, best engineered, best duo and group. It was crazy.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that record, how it came together. Any stories, any insights that you'd be happy to share.
Well, there's a funny story, but I won't start with that one. But I had met Donald when they were remastering, their entire Steely Dan catalog at Masterdisk. To be completely honest, he probably would have gone to Bob if Bob was still in Manhattan, but Donald didn't want to travel, and he needed to listen to his record in a reference listening room, and the label knew of my work, so they suggested it came over, and he knew who I was, so it wasn't a complete raw introduction. The first session was I'm sorry, that was Kamakuriad. That was how we got to know each other in Kamakuriad. He came in, we did some listening. I made some suggestions. He took everything home, listened to it, blah, 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 blah. So then Two Against Nature came around, and we had the experience of working together on Kamakuriad and a live record. It was done despite all, despite how difficult it was all done mixed to 96K 24-bit, but in 2000 that was really hard. There was a Mitsubishi X86 that was capable of going X86 HD, 96 HD, whatever. It was a one tape machine that was capable of 96K, and there was a Gen X magneto-optical machine that was capable of 96K, and that's what they recorded the thing on. So all the mixes came in on optical discs that you popped into this Gen X machine.
Wow.
All of the processing was hardware digital. Honestly, the whole thing was done with a Harmonia Mundi, a digital EQ. That's what we had used on Kamakuriads, and that's what he got used to using. It was interesting in that there were a number of revisions. He came back several times for revisions, but what it came down to were there were some issues with the mix that he probably would have gone back and changed the mixes on. But I was told later when we were working on Sunken Condos that Donald he was very, very, very particular, but once he's made a decision, he only wants to think forward. He doesn't want to give himself the opportunity to go back because he knows that how big of a Pandora's box that is. If he goes back and opens up a mix, now there's, working in analog and analog/digital, it'll never be identically the same. And so he had a couple songs on Two Against Nature where there was a vocal thing that he didn't like, but there were stacked percussion instruments in the same frequency range. So everything that he tried to do to fix the vocal caused there to be an imbalance in the percussion. Mm-hmm. And while this sounds like wacky, anal, hyper technical. Remember, the mixes are really transparent. They don't have a lot going on. They don't have chunky guitars going through those things.
Everything on that record is like crystal clear, right? Like you hear all the elements.
It's super transparent. So if you, quite realistically, if you had a half dB at 1.4 or 1.8 or 2.2K, one shaker gets louder than the other one. And that's what was actually driving him nuts. As we wanted to try to take a little bit of the nasal out of the vocal, but to do that was upsetting the balance in the percussion, and he was like, "Screw it!" After like 13 iterations, he finally gave up.
So you left it natural.
Well, on that particular song, it was the decision. He admitted. If I recall properly, he admitted we probably should go back and remix it, but he was not willing to do that. And they're already, anticipating. They were so close to being done. All he had to do was call it good, and he could move forward.
Panned out okay in the end.
Yeah. So, funny part about it was the record, was approved, and we made the masters for it, and everything went off to the plant, and they were in production of it. And Donald and Walter came to the studio to work on a single edit on the song "Cousin Dupree," which was the lead single for that record. And we're trying to shorten up the intro. We're trying to shorten the solo, this section that was massively long at the end. It's like a 6-minute song. They're trying to make a 4-minute single out of it, but it's hard. It was hard. It's very hard to fade to Donald, Steely Dan. Well, it's not hard, but it's hard for them to give up on any part of the song. Right. But they recognized that they needed to. and Walter and Donald were in the back behind me, cracking each other up, just making jokes. Shit that was going over my head the whole time. I had no idea what they were talking about. They were laughing and having a good time. And Donald gets really serious at one point, and he says to Walter, why didn't we add background vocals to this song? And Walter laughs, realizing what that question really meant, and he goes, "I don't know. Why didn't we add? It was kind of like it was a knock joke. I don't know. Why didn't we add background vocals to this song?" and then Donald wasn't amused, but Walter goes, "Well, you think we should?" And he goes, "Play that chorus back again." And I played it back, and he kind of crooned along, "How's about a kiss from your cousin?" Kind of sang along this alternate, higher harmony. And Walter goes, "Should we do it?" He goes, "It seems like it needs it." And he goes, so the record was already in production, in the plant, being replicated, and everyone had signed off on it. And they had, right from my studio, they called Roger Nichols, they called the background vocalists. They got, the next day, the session was set up at the studio, flew Roger in from he was probably in Florida or someplace down south, and recorded the new vocals, which weren't subtle. There was some oohs and ahs that they added, and they did a whole chorus vamp thing. And quite frankly, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that it went from an average song to a potential hit song. In that moment, where it could have just called it good, and it would have been good. But they,
wow,
because without those background vocals, it really, listening to it in hindsight, it was remarkably, it was missing. But when you're in the middle of that, working at that the process so much, and you don't ask yourself, if someone doesn't ask that question. Right. You just keep moving forward. But it was just really crazy opportunity to be on that, on the front line while that was happening. The final amazing. Mix wasn't remade. Actually, Roger made a vocal stem to add to the mix that we had. So we made that creation inside the workstation, and then ran it, and we didn't have to rerun it through the EQ because we already had, and blah 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 blah. One thing led to another, and the three of us at the studio at the time stayed all night remaking all the master tapes, the of the CD production masters that had to go back out again that night once it was approved. And it was pretty crazy, but then that becomes becomes a Grammy song and a Grammy-winning record, and I have to give him full credit for when perfect wasn't close enough, or when not perfect wasn't good enough.
That's the full circle on this conversation, right? It's like that, yeah, absolutely. Wow, it just makes you think like there's so many roads you could take on any given project, right? Like there's always like another exit route or detour or something, and when is something actually done? I guess just when you, the mastering engineer, says this is it, right? That's it.
Or this came pretty close to fixing it in the shrink wrap. Is what that came pretty. It was almost in the stores before they decided to call it back and make it good.
Yeah, listen, when Steely Dan asks you to work late hours, I guess you do it, right?
And with a lot of enjoyment because the music sounded great. We were dancing around. We were working through the night making copies, but speakers blasting, and we were enjoying the process because, the good news is we were all pretty well paid to be working on the project, and because of the deadlines and the way the whole thing turned around, it was good. Honestly, good for everybody. It wasn't a mistake that somebody was covering up. It was just like, wow, this feel it could be better, and they went for it. I'd like to think I try to live that way. It's hard sometimes, but
that's really awesome.
I like to try to live that way.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's great. Yeah, and I guess I'll ask you about one more record just while I have you here. So the John Mayer, his initial record, the Room for Squares. What's the word for the first record? Freshman release, I guess. Is that what they say?
Yep.
Yeah. So walk me through. You said you mentioned you had a story about that, and I love that. It's a great sounding record. Also similar to the Steely Dan records, very clear. You kind of hear everything. Everything is super pronounced. Tell me a little bit about that record.
Well, it first came to me through a Columbia Records representative that wanted to master it. I'd worked with Lee Dene on a couple other projects, and she said, "I've got this record, but it's going to be a little different because first it's coming in and it's going to be built. The work's going to be billed to Aware Records." And basically, she shared with me that that Columbia had an option to pick up the record if the Aware version of it did as well as they expected it to. And clearly, she thought it was going to be a successful record because she attended the mix sessions and she attended the mastering sessions, and she was Columbia's representative there. But they were working in conjunction with Aware. This is a small Chicago independent music independent record. So there actually is a available, but probably in limited supply, this original version of this record with a plain black cover. And it's in my Desert Island Discs record collection. So what I'm getting at, I jumped the story just a little bit. So this record was originally done for Aware Records, same song, same sequence, but the mixes that John and John Alacia and John Mayer originally approved were the mixes that went on this record, and you'll notice some very dramatic differences if you get a chance to listen to that record. But by far the biggest difference was it was sort of a band-focused record and not a vocal-focused record. And in hindsight, looking back, this would not nearly have been as commercially successful on radio without the remixes that they did. So fast forward, so that record was done. Everybody approved it. And fast forward about 3 or 4 months, and or maybe 5 months, and Lee called me back. It's like, well, it happened. They sold a whole bunch of records, and Columbia's picked it up, and we're going to have half the songs remixed by Jack Joseph Puig, and then it all needs to be remastered. And it turns out, at the moment, I can't remember which ones were remixed, but you can kind of find that out. I think if you look through the credits.
We'll do a little Googling.
You have to do a little deep dive.
Yeah.
But I had to remaster the previous tracks to then match the sound of the new mixes. So
sure.
I hold that up as one of my kind of contemporary, crazy contemporary experiences of being asked to really kind of repurpose half of this record for into a whole new record. And it took a little doing because he had brought the vocals so much far forward. He'd taken quite a bit of mid range out of the bass. But let me say really clearly that I loved this original version, and I still listen to this.
It sounds more like you would listen to John Mayer live, or maybe Continuum or something.
It's yeah. It really, this is the record that the producer and the artist originally wanted to make. The Room for Squares with the little periodic table of artwork on the front of it. It's a great record, and it's a very good, beautiful commercial record. I've heard those songs in Home Depot, in the deli, and in the grocery store, and the post office. I've heard them everywhere, and they translate really, really well. I love the sound of the original record, but obviously the decision to make it a more commercially viable record was sort of undeniable. So that's a really, really, for me, a really, really unique opportunity to see the same tracks, same original tracks, almost exclusively the same tracks, made into two different records. And even though they have the same songs, the same lyrics, the same solos and everything, if you have the opportunity to hear them side by side, you'll go like, wow, it's really a different experience.
Yeah, well, I had no idea, and I'm going to have to do a deep dive and listen to both versions now.
Gonna have to, Jay, go. You can DM me for a ripped version of a couple songs if you can't find it, because I think this might not be available. But I'm sorry, I can't make that publicly available to the world, because I don't own it.
Yeah, no. But
awesome. if I were Aware Records, I would keep this in production. But I don't know. Maybe it might not have been allowed. May or may not have been allowed.
They probably bought all the rights or whatever.
You would think that's what a label would do, right?
Right. Exactly. Wow, this is so good.
But John was a real sweetheart. We worked together on that. He was almost shy. I was told that at the time on his first record, he didn't even really want to sing. He didn't think his singing was up to it. He wanted to play his guitar because he was a guitarist, and so they convinced him to sing. And the rest is history. I think wow. He's proven that he's pretty damn good at leading a band. And
he's an amazing vocalist. I heard the same thing happened with Bill Withers on his original record, because he's like, I'm a songwriter, like someone. So who's singing this? Who's singing? Lean on me. Like.
So sometimes only person with that experience can really put that into it.
Yeah.
I love the quote, which has stuck with me now for that was 23 years ago. My quarter life crisis. That one particular line from it's just my quarter life crisis. Never had heard it before, and I was like that phrase before. And as a 25-year-old, he was going through his quarter life crisis.
Aren't we all, right?
Exactly. Even though I'm looking at that in the rearview mirror, I'm still going through it.
Yeah, well, right, totally. But hopefully we'll live a bit longer than they did in the previous generations. Let's hope.
Let's hope.
Amazing. Well, this has been so good, Scott. I learned so much. This is really enthralling, and the stories are great also. So thank you so much for all of that. I do want to get to a couple of different questions before we close it out. I like to ask everybody about creative energy. And we all have days where we're super pumped to get in the studio, do our job, and do the thing that we'd love to do. But eventually, sometimes we all find burned out or we're less motivated. Do you have any habits, routines, or anything that you do to kind of stay inspired and do the work that you do?
Well, I do give myself permission to. So it's important to say that I'm working on a particular project for a day or for 2 days. So I'm not in the trenches with them for weeks, but I give myself permission to, within reason, to say back to my clients, I need to take this over to tomorrow. I don't usually tell them why, because it really sort of doesn't matter. It's just, I really feel like this is going to be better if I can come at this, whether it's with fresh ears or because my ears are tired or I just got some bad news or I got to race to the bank to get a check in because mortgage payment, got lost, or something. Just this kind of chaos that doesn't make for good music. So I've given myself the permission to disappoint my clients on a very short term, but to give them something better and something that I know is better. to a man and woman, they they'll always give me that, at least once.
Yeah.
Like, kind of the honesty of like, I started working on your project. I'm not feeling it. I know it's in there. I don't want to just send you my half baked thing. Tomorrow I'm coming in early and I'm gonna, and sometimes it's environmental stuff. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's nothing in particular. I just didn't connect with the song. I'll know it happens because I'll be listening to the song or a element of the record over and over and over again, and my brain never shifts into do mode. I'm just sitting there listening, like, what does it need? What does it do? What does it need? What am I? Why am I here? Why? And I start, and I like that's when I can start to after the third or fourth listen, and I haven't got any ideas. I need to step back, do something else. I might, if it's only a song or two and I don't really want to delay to the next day, I might, run into our third room here, the shop, and I might sit on the bench and take something apart that I've been dying to take apart. And because I know if I get into to go do something completely different, that I'm going to come back and go, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I was missing. And even if it's just something that I'm telling myself to help me to get the work done, it's still productive. It's still worth doing. I kind of don't have a habit of doing anything the same way over and over again. I'm trying to figure out a way to say this the right way. I pretty much do it differently every day. And whatever it is, it's whether it's the coffee before eggs one day or after eggs, or I forget coffee altogether, or I start with a mix and that I work on a mix or song that we're working on at home before I come to work, or I get right up and I go right to work and I start working on. I've realized a while ago that my habit is it's not chaos, but it's not get in line. Like this is my time for creativity. This is my time for.
You have ability to kind of roll with it.
Yeah. And probably with everybody that's, I don't know, with everybody that's a musician or songwriter, or creative has a little bit of a somewhere on the spectrum, I guess, so for all of us. It's just a quirk.
Yeah.
I feel like the people around me that watch me work probably wonder how anything really gets done, but somehow I get a lot of stuff done, but it's not in any particular order all the time. One interesting thing, though, that happens when people come to a mastering session, whether it's in the mastering room or the lathe room or the recording studio, their expectations then sort of like dictate how all that happens. And it's kind of fun because the whole rest of my noisy world goes away for a few hours, and I'm there for them. And it actually makes some parts of it easier to manage, and as opposed to like, how much more time should I spend on this? Is this done? I'm ready to move on. It's like, oh yeah, well, dealing with the sometimes chaotic exposure to my phone and my texts and emails and stuff.
Yes,
nothing makes me happier than the days I leave my phone at home by accident. Those are days by lunch I'm going like, wow, I really got a lot. Oh yeah, where's my phone? That's why I got a lot done, because I didn't interrupt myself.
These phones are destroying our brains, and we don't like. It's like we've exposed ourselves to like the nicotine, like or whatever it is, like 100 years ago, or without knowing what the damage is going to be,
Yeah, so I'm still figuring it out, to be honest. But what makes me happy is a combination of all those things. Jump into the room and or oversee a mix, or consult on the lathe, or lock myself in the lathe room to do a live cut off of analog tape, and put a sign on the door because no one can interrupt me while I'm in the middle of that.
Amazing.
all of that stuff sort of makes me happy. And then I do some other kind of crazy, not crazy, but some interesting stuff on the side. For a while I was, and I may still get back to it, but I've done some automobile racing and restoration. So that's when I tell people I race an old Volvo, they go like, that's not a race car. But yeah, well, it is if you put a roll cage in it and a seat and you drive it really fast, it's a race car. So there.
Amazing. And really quickly, before I get to the final question of the show, I wanted to ask you really quickly. You have like a studio on the premise of Masterdisk. Tell me just briefly about that.
Well, it started out as a storeroom for a bunch of leftover acoustics and things that I had when I moved out of the city. And like I said earlier, I've always had some sort of creative outlet for working with artists and songs and as a producer, as an engineer in the studio. So it kind of dawned on me to take this room next door, about 1,000 square feet with 18-foot ceilings, and turn it into a live performance space. And I really, more than build a studio, I really like having a live recording environment where everybody's in a room together. I mean, so it's a nice sounding room. It's modestly treated. It's not heavily treated. We tried to keep the outside noise to a dull roar, but we can't make everything go away. But it's got really great ceilings and such. But a euphonics analog console sits over in one corner of it. But there's no window, there's no doors, there's no sound lock. It's just, which means you have to choose a slightly different way of working. Let's see, it was about 15 years ago. I worked on a project where we tracked everything in a room with a console in the room, and I was just so happy being able to turn around and go like, no, do 2 times on the chorus, and I'm just in the room, talking with the musicians as a production partner, not having to go into, open the door, make sure the monitors are off, get people take headphones off. And so one of the things that's actually most enjoyable about the room is recording with the engineer has the headphones on and the band doesn't. So I wear the headphones and make sure that everything's, set up properly. And then the band plays. And where possible, we can't always do this because obviously, there's leakage and some other problems at times. But the best use of the room is when, a 3-piece or 4-piece can just play live in the room without headphones and really just gel and be alive with themselves. And so it's a room that kind of sounds good. It's kind of fun to work in, but it's also not this super commercial space. The business part of that studio, it doesn't revolve around having to be booked X number of days a month or hours a day. So it's in some respects it's just my playroom. It's where I go to play, but it's a little more than that. And so this year I put myself back on track with something that I started to do just before COVID, but stopped for obvious reasons. I want to do a series of live in the studio, direct to tape, live to tape, all analog vinyl releases that are unique, recorded here, mixed and mastered here. Well, not mixed, but there's live recorded to tape and then cut onto vinyl here in a very minimalist sort of way. We've done a couple of those sessions already, and I'm really happy with the results. We're going to get better at it, but it's the proof of concept is in place. So, by the end of the year, we should have a few singles out.
Very cool. Yeah, get that classic thing of just getting the right mic in the right place and, capturing it.
For me, it's getting the artist like completely comfortable to do something, and maybe even getting or uncomfortable, but in a really productive way. Something getting them to think differently and to perform differently. They usually leave going like, "Wow, I would have never done that at my studio that way. I would have never tried doing it that way." But it's not going to be for everyone. But I think there's enough interest in it, and quite simply, I enjoy doing it. So that's why I want to do it.
Yeah, it's like those tiny desk concerts. The NPR tiny.
It really is a lot.
Because
like
people when you have to hear everything acoustically in the space, you just play differently. You naturally, mess with your volume. Whether it's your volume or your voice, how much amplitude you're putting out or whatever. It's just there's that natural chemistry that musicians have between one another when all they're hearing is what's right there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a YouTube series, the One Mic recording sessions that are actually quite good. And he's been doing a really nice job with the stereo single point microphone. For me, it's since I'm also a disc cutter and have the lathe, it's this sort of an obvious connection to let's just create music the way it was done in the 70s and see if people dig it. Once I get it off the ground, we'll see if anybody, see if people enjoy it. Hopefully they do.
Awesome. Amazing. Okay. So I just have one question. I mean, if we had infinite time, I would ask more questions, but it is getting quite late here by me. But this has been such a treat. Really, thank you, Scott.
Cool.
This is so fun for me. So the final question of the show, which I ask everybody, I'll ask you as well. Looking back on your journey, was there something that you did or maybe that you didn't do that you'd want to impart on your earlier self, or maybe somebody who's coming up now today, of be like, hey, keep at that. That's the thing you got to do, or maybe quit that. That's the thing holding you back.
Well, there were some interesting moments where I could have gone left or right, and I made a choice that turned out to be really advantageous. Not really knowing which was right at the time, kind of feeling like. I mean, in hindsight, it seems really ridiculously simple because I chose Masterdisk over the other opportunity that I was looking at. But instead of going for a free the opportunity that I had when I was given the chance to go do a unpaid summer internship at Masterdisk was I was being paid to work with Rick James in his studio in Orchard Park in Buffalo. And literally, Rick James and his engineer, Tom Fly, sitting in the room with me, like, you don't want to be no master engineer. You want to be here with us. This is where the shit's happening. But inside part of me was like, really, yeah, I really do kind of want to be here because there's a lot of really cool shit going on. He had just made Super Freak.
Oh my God.
And he spent the next budget, or the budget for the next record he spent on building a studio in the basement of his house. Sort of how I got the idea to put a studio in the basement of my house. So we put this API console and a whole bunch of gear, and I wasn't the lead engineer. I was an assistant to an assistant, but they recognized my energy and how hard I was willing to work and kind of really kind of pull for the team for them. So I felt kind of strange leaving that for a situation where I had no idea, and it was a very different environment. Well, I'll put it this way. The studio's name was The Joint. The dog's name was Ganja. And the background vocals are the Mary Jane Girls. So you can have an idea what the sense of, and here we are on 420.
Yes, that's right. Recording on 420. Yes.
So, so my 20-something brain was like, this is where, this is what I want to do. I mean, I was way into synthesis and the drum machines and Prophet synthesizers. So everything, but boy, what a difference of life that would have been for me. I mean, hopefully I would have gotten off the boat before it crashed and burned. But Rick had a lot of problems just a few years later, and really took his career into a tailspin. And meantime, I'm getting coffee, and for Hugh Padgham, and actually being schooled on how to make a proper cup of coffee by Hugh Padgham, a proper cup of tea by Hugh Padgham, because I had never made tea the proper way for a British client. And so he literally said, "You come with me," and he walked me into the kitchen. It's like, no, this is how you make a cup of tea, and like, how the heck would I have known that?
Yeah.
But it was so not quite the answer, not quite the question you asked, but there were definitely moments when the could have gone one way or the other, and it was. I've had some tribulations, some I don't know how to describe them. Questions of where to put my money, or where my money has gone, or how to organize my finances, how to organize the business finances, how to keep track of things like that. And so there's been some times I've waited too long to reach out for help. But that also comes with a question of who do you ask for help? So in a couple of instances, when I did reach out for help, I found myself in the clutches of some people taking advantage of my situation, which in at least one or two situations made things worse. So, I that's why I'm having trouble of putting this into like sage wisdom sort of thing. I do like the sense that the comment or the way of thinking about things that the person running the business, whether it's the CEO or the sole owner or operator, his job is really to make a decision. It's not, you don't necessarily know the right answer at any given point, but you've got to make a decision to help the process move forward if you're going to sit there. So I would, the 20, 30, 40 year ago me would spend way too much time waffling on pros and cons of one decision or another. Now I realize that if you iterate faster, make a decision, go for it, and then stop. As long as and if it's not right, stop. But you'll
right.
You won't really know until you get around the corner anyway. So you might as well go around the corner and see what's there.
Yeah, it's like that It's like that ability to kind of accept that you will fail, and then when you fail, you'll just learn and pick yourself back up. But you don't if you're fearing failure too much, you're never going to get anywhere, because then you're just going to like not be decisive, and you're not going to be.
I literally just said this morning, it's failure is just as much a self-fulfilling prophecy as success. If you're afraid of it, you're trying to avoid it, it's going to happen. You can put that energy into something that at least has an opportunity to lead you in the right direction.
Right.
But who you trust and who you bring on board has so much to do with whether it's a success or a failure. And sometimes those are your choices that you can look back on, but it's all you got. You make the best decisions with the information that you have, and hopefully, you can pivot quickly.
Yeah,
when you have to.
Yeah,
or at least make it look good when you do.
Yeah, good luck. Right.
I tell people that I got I went to music school, not to business school. So the sort of excess money and agony that I had in running a business was the MBA I didn't get.
Yeah,
but it's been a good ride. It's far from over. It's been a good ride.
Amazing. Well, Scott, I love what you're doing. Your work speaks for itself, and I learned so much talking with you, and this was really fun and illuminating. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this podcast. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I hope we cross paths again before too long, and wish you well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and/or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.